found out.
Yeah.
So my name is Vanessa McMullen. I am a social worker at North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center. I'm a supervisor at the Marks Family Right from the Start program, which is our early childhood agency. And that's where we work with children and their families who are really from birth to age 10. And we work with families on pretty much anything that you could imagine that impacts children and families. Anxiety, ADHD, behavioral issues, parental divorce, trauma. So we really see it all. And then in addition to that, I am the coordinator of the maternal depression program, where we work with women who are experiencing perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and help them really learn to work through what's supposed to be a very wonderful time, but can cause some problems. So that's the part of the agency I work at. I've been there for almost 12 years now. So I'm very involved in the community and working with parents and trying to teach about different topics as it relates to working better with our children. So this is the first in a series of what we're going to hopefully be doing as monthly meetings. And I'm certainly open to topics that you want to hear about and information that you'd like to learn. But for today, what I did was I planned a meeting on temperament. So what I like to start talking about temperament because hopefully it's going to help you think differently or engage differently with your children. And temperament basically refers to the way in which a person relates to the world. It's sort of your innate personality, and it's ingrained in us, and it really varies from person to person, and it presents it in different ways over the course of a child's life. So we're going to focus on it today as it relates to early childhood, and then we'll sort of take it on up as it relates to us. So there are 9 different traits that temperament is broken down into. So I'm going to go through them quickly each, and then we're going to talk about how they group together and how that sort of creates the personality of our children. And then I've got some information for you all to take with you that will break it down so you can take it, what I'm saying. So the first phase, well, before I get to that, I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that temperaments, the traits exist on a continuum. So that means that kids can have very much of something, very little of another, fall somewhere in between on each of the 9 traits. And you'll find that most children fall in between, but you know, we happen to think of the more extreme cases when we think of easy or difficult temperament. So a perfect example of this is trait 1, which is activity level. That is pretty obvious. It's the motion in which a child moves. Are they always running, jumping, crashing? Or are they much more laid back? They're good to chill. They're good to just sit and kind of watch what's going on around them. The second is regularity, and that refers to the rhythm of a child functioning. This is a child who's very much routine oriented. They nap at the same time every day. They like dinner at the same time. There's sort of a rhythm to their functioning versus children who are all over the place. What happens one day is different than the next. It's hard to make sense of that rhythm. The third one is called initial reaction. They're actually starting to also call it approach now. And this is the way in which a child approaches a new situation. Are they hesitant and get a little resistant to trying something new? Or you have some kids who seem much more bold and they jump right in with a lot of enthusiasm. And that sort of pairs well with the 4th trait, which is adaptability. So regardless of the initial reaction, adaptability is how they adapt to their new environment. Are they flexible? Do they embrace the change? This is a child who can handle if there's a substitute teacher, or just can go with the flow if the schedule changes. Versus a child who's much more rigid and inflexible. These, we all, I'm sure, know who these kids are. They don't understand, that it's raining and they can't play outside, or if something is supposed to happen, they have a very hard time understanding that that's not going to be the plan anymore. This can also present in difficulty with transitions throughout the day. They have a hard time transitioning from one activity to the other. They don't have a lot of adaptability. The 5th temperamental trait is intensity. And this is the amount of energy that a child puts into their reactions. So this would be a child who can either have a very big reaction. They're they get very angry, or they have that big laughter that's, very contagious, versus a child who's much less intense. And maybe if they're upset or cranky, they fuss a little bit, or they laugh just a little bit. They're not very overtly intense. The sixth trait is mood. And this is another more obvious one, but it encompasses a child's overall picture. So we expect that all children are going to feel happy, sad, scared, angry at times, but it's just a general overall presentation of their functioning. Does your child wake up happy, smiling? They're generally just in a pretty good mood, versus someone who just has a cranky disposition. They just never seem to be happy. That's how some.
I know adults like that.
Yes,
actually.
yes. This is going to
right.
This is going to go all the way up. So this next one is, it's grouped as persistence and attention span. They're actually also looking at it a little bit differently now, separate from attention. They're looking at persistence, and that's the way in which a child will continue to do something despite obstacles and despite the things that are going on around them. So this is a child who's going to work through something and push through even if there's a little bit of a challenge, versus a child maybe with a poor frustration tolerance that just gives up easily and says, you know what, I can't do this, I'm not doing it. And that goes sort of hand in hand with the next one, which is, again, one that we're all looking at a lot more recently, which is distractibility, and the ability or inability to work despite what's going on around you. These are kids who have a task in front of them, but hear something going on in the other room, or want to watch TV, or feel something on their foot, and then they're very much off task. A good example of this is a kid, you say, oh, all right, it's time to leave, go get your shoes. And 5 minutes later, now they come down, they don't have their socks on, they don't have their shoes, they picked up a toy, they're watching TV, they've completely lost the ability to focus on what's in front of them. And then, so when we look at distractibility, in a baby, it's actually very much seen as a positive trait. A baby is crying, you shake a rattle or a toy, or give them food, something that distracts them, it's soothing, and these kids are able to calm down. Whereas when you get a little bit older, it's obviously much of a less desired trait to have a child who's significantly distractible. So I always just like to give that example, so as you look, as things present differently as kids get older. And then finally, sensitivity and sensory threshold, which is basically how a person's body interprets the stimulation from the environment around them. So that would be the things that we see, smell, touch, hear, and taste. Those are the five senses. So for a child who is hyposensitive, they are underwhelmed by the environment around them. So these are kids that are always running and banging into things. They're crashing. They like to swing really high on the swings. They like the music loud. They're looking for that stimulation for their body, versus a child who is hypersensitive and they have a harder time taking in that stimulation. So this would be a child who maybe hears the clock ticking. Most of us don't hear that, but for a child with a sensory threshold issue, they hear that, or the humming of a loud machine. Something else that presents a lot with children with a hypersensitivity are sensory issues to clothing. I don't know if you guys, anyone's experienced that, but these are kids who the tags on their clothes bother them, or their shoes or socks are too tight, or they only have one pair of pants that they'll wear. It's leggings. They won't wear jeans or certain fabrics. So it can present as certainly a challenging behavior, but that's, excuse me. That's just an additional challenge. So those are the 9 traits, and again, I have them so no one's expected to remember, but a lot of times these traits are really clustered together, and the clusters of traits can really make up the temperament of an easy kid or a more difficult kid. So in reflecting on the things that I said, what temperaments would make up an easy child? Flexible? I'm sorry? Easygoing. Happy. Yeah. Overall positive mood, not so intense, regular schedule, versus a more difficult temperament, which would be intense, absolutely.
Very active.
Active. Distractibility. Yep. So, when and a lot of times these kids have tendency to even exist in the same family. I hear all the time, oh, he's always been my easy one, or she's always from day one always been cranky. So it's there. And, the reason I like to, like I said, talk about this is because you want to really ask if these traits work for or against your children and how they're going to approach the world. Because when we talk about it within a family, there are different temperament styles within the family, but also in the larger world. So we want to try to help our kids. We can't change the temperament, but we can certainly help them and work to navigate with the environment around them. So the way that we sort of start with this is I always like to encourage adults to look at how a child's temperament meshes with your own. So, we're talking about kids' temperament, but as a parent or a teacher, do you find that you understand these kids because you too are shy or hesitant for new situations? So you get that your child is shy and maybe doesn't want to go to a new place. Or your child could have a similar temperament to you, which could drive you absolutely up the wall. That happens as well. Or, on the opposite end, if you don't understand your child or you don't understand that level of intensity or that distractibility, it can be very frustrating as a parent. One of the examples that I like to share is that I personally have some sensory issues with a lot of times clothes and, socks and all that other stuff. So I really get when these kids are uncomfortable. So when I have a parent that comes in and is like, getting dressed every morning is a nightmare. They wear one pair of pants. So the parent goes out, they buy them like 7 pairs of the same shoes and leggings, and then the child is like, no, I don't want to wear those. They don't feel the same. They don't feel comfortable. And the parent, in one instance, it could be the child being a little bit difficult, but it also can be sort of a different issue, which is that it's not comfortable for that child. So I get it because I've experienced it, but most parents don't think that way because, when you're trying to get ready and out the door, you just interpret it as, come on, you got to get your act together. Let's go. We've been through this every day. So it can be really frustrating. So it's just sort of a good, different way to think about things sometimes. So when we look at how our children's temperament and our temperament, it's important to look at that in the function of the house, whether it's another parent or another caregiver or siblings. And, if you are all in the house generally pretty quiet and go with the flow, and you've got a loud, active kid, this kid doesn't, not a bad kid, but it just doesn't mesh so well with the family environment. So it's going to be just maybe taking extra consideration to figure out how to make those family dynamics work for everyone.
And how do you do that?
We're gonna talk about all that. So in talking outside the family, also, we look at goodness of fit with teachers. Some kids really do better with a structured teacher who's got a lot of limits and boundaries, and they know what to expect every day, versus children who really just require much more flexibility and adaptability to maybe do the same tasks as other kids. It's present socially. How many times kids just seem to maybe mesh well with another kid? Just you can leave them alone for however long and they just play so wonderfully together. Or on the opposite end, a kid who the two kids can't get along. They always seem to be arguing. A lot of times that can happen when you have two children with very similar temperamental traits. If you have two kids who are inflexible and intense and loud and active, that can be a recipe for not getting along so well. So certainly something to consider as well. So I don't necessarily want to worry anybody that's thinking if their temperaments are more difficult, because like I said, it is very workable. It's going to be about making some different modifications to your own home or your own behaviors. If you have an intense child and you're an intense person yourself, that's a recipe for going from here all the way up to here. So and the kid's really not going to come down on their own. It's going to be up to the parent to say, all right, I have to bring down my reactive level. I have to bring down my intensity level. I have to figure out how to give directions better because my child is distractible. And, that's something that can make a big difference. So I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, so, it's going to be, so I have some stuff about how to work with children better with temperament and figure out how to help them, because removing the challenge and always fixing it isn't necessarily the best strategy either, because that's not the way the world works. And, this is actually might be another part of the training that we do, where we talk about resiliency and overcoming obstacles, because that's a life challenge. It's, and you're, as adults, we see there are temperaments of people around us, maybe a boss or a coworker or a neighbor that we just don't gel with. Doesn't mean that we don't have to deal with that person most of the time. We have to figure out a way to make it work. So it's a really healthy model for the kids to say, like, all right, let's figure out how we're going to work with this. So does anybody have any questions about anything that I've said so far? I'm going to give you guys some of the material to look at, and then we'll talk some more. Is that okay? Okay. All right, so these two things go together. Okay. Okay. So this is an article on temperament, and it breaks it down in relation to young children. That's just information about our agency. I didn't know if anybody
Good. Yes.
wanted it, but I
Okay.
have it. Okay. So let's see. Okay. So if you look at this wheel, like I had said in the beginning, that everything sort of exists on a continuum. So you can be very much of one thing, very little of something, none of anything, or usually fall somewhere in between. So this is just a visual way to measure your temperament versus your child's temperament and see what fits well and what really is maybe at odds a little bit, okay? That's just a worksheet I like to use. And then, for your question before, which is how do you manage these things, this is just a list of tips. So a lot of it has to do, like I said, with the adult changing their responses to things or their approach to the child. And so when we're talking about very young children, it's, good to get on their level, good to make eye contact. And this is regardless of probably any temperamental trait. It's always good to give directions in that way. But really working to understand what is your child, what is maybe more difficult for your child than we would consider more typical. So if you notice that your child is more distractible, it's good to filter out noises. If you're giving directions, things like turning the TV off and making sure that you have their attention. Again, I gave that example of a kid, go get your shoes. For some kids, they can do that without a problem. For other kids, you might need to break down those directions for them. One step. Can you go get your shoes and bring it to me? You may need to go with them initially. Some kids need visual cues. They need, you guys have them all over here, something that is a visual reminder of the things that they need to do. If they're disorganized, a checklist, what they need before they leave the house in the morning, their backpack, their lunchbox, their gym shoes, whatever it is. Different things that can just sort of help them learn to do things on their own. Because the goal is not that you're going to be doing this every single day. It's that you're going to be laying a nice foundation. And once the kids get the hang of it, it will help things run more smoothly. Let's see. Okay. Kids who are very active, again, we look at it as maybe they're not listening. A lot of times that sensory threshold and the activity level is a physical release. They need to run, they need to jump. In the summer and the nice, beautiful weather, it's easier to make those things happen. When everybody's cooped up inside all winter, it is more difficult. So figuring out a way to help your child sort of make that happen. These are kids that, like I said, are jumping all over the couch, and that's not necessarily okay, but maybe they need a break when they get home from school instead of jumping right into homework time. They need to come, they need to get some of their energy out. Maybe on a beautiful day, you can go to the park or play in the backyard. Sometimes kids can have like a sport after school, and then settling down to do homework. On the opposite track, some kids just do better coming home, getting it done right away, and then they can relax. So it's really about knowing your child, and sometimes a little bit of trial and error, figuring out what works, figuring out what doesn't work. Over the course of, like I said, I think our monthly meetings, I can talk a lot more about routines and behavior modification strategies and discipline, and anything else that you guys would like to know about. So I'm happy to listen to some suggestions for things that I can put together. So this is sort of part one, and we're going to take it a little bit further each time. But I'd like to open it up for discussion, and we can talk a little bit about what I said, or I can answer some questions that you guys have. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
Just looking at this quickly, the high intensity kids.
Yes.
Which I do have. I know a solution is sleep.
Yes.
But for a child that struggles with sleep, I was just thinking, so my child still takes a nap at the end of the day. When she comes home from school, she's wet. She will then sleep from 1:30 until 3:30.
Okay.
Or even until 4. I woke her up at 4 yesterday because I do want her to be able to go to bed.
Okay.
So for a child like that, but then bedtime is honestly she's been falling asleep at like 8:30.
Okay.
I wish it was more like 7.
Okay.
But should I? Because I was contemplating. Oh, should we take this nap away so that she goes to bed earlier? Or is it essential for her to get that sleep when she can get it?
How old is she?
She's 3.
She's 3. It's a long day. These kids are up early, they're busy, they're active. In some instances, and I'm sure you've probably seen it on the days where maybe you're a little off schedule and you don't get to keep a nap, by probably 5, 6 o'clock, it's like a little bit of witching hour, and you're like, 8 o'clock can't come fast enough. I would say if it's working for her right now, and she's able to get up on time, she's able to go to school and do a nice job, she's able to be okay in that time period in between nap and bedtime, I would say it's probably working. 3, they're still very little. They're exhausted. Yeah, is she getting enough sleep? If she sleeps at 8 and wakes up at
5:30.
Yeah.
That's the thing. If she's not going to get the sleep overnight, she's always an early riser. And yeah, she wakes up and she does a great job at school, but when she comes home, she falls apart.
Yeah, it sounds like she needs a nap after school, at least for the time being, and then, hopefully she will make that shift on her own, where she starts to show you that she either needs less and less, or, maybe at some point you'll have to work to push it. But it seems like it's working for her right now, and it sounds like she's getting a decent amount of sleep.
Yes.
So that's, but the sleep is fuel. They have to sleep, and sometimes one of the things I work with families a lot on is modifying that pre-bedtime routine. It's a lot of times kids are on screens until probably much later than they should be, and they watch TV maybe right up until bedtime, and then we turn it off and say, all right, well, now turn your brain off and go to sleep. And the brain really doesn't work that way. There's so many studies coming out now, obviously, even with adults. We're all on our phones until we literally close our eyes, and then we don't understand why we're having trouble sleeping, or we're not getting a restful sleep. So usually giving a time limit or a cutoff for, this is the time screens go away, or this is the time that phones are off. And it sort of helps everybody come down a little bit. So maybe going back to books or quiet activities, bath time, all of those things that I know we do, but we sometimes add that TV and just is like, all right, go watch a show before bed. Some kids can tolerate it, some kids really can, and we're noticing as they get older, it's harder. They're looking at, unfortunately, TV and media and all that stuff and it has an addictive quality to it, and you want more and more. And so, I'm sorry. So this is a great time to really establish some of those routines, and as parents, even model them. I work with families, kids who everyone's got their phones out at the dinner table. Put them away, and not just the kids, the parents too. It's all about really establishing boundaries around what's a very real issue. No one wants to be cut off, but it's really becoming excessive. So working to change that is something that's important to do now. Yes.
What are some tips? So in my home, I actually have a son who's very small.
Okay.
He loves to sleep at the same time and eat at the same time and go to the potty at the same time. He's very much like that, which is great because at least we know what we're in for. Mm-hmm. But he's very receptive to doing those things with mom. But when mom's not there and someone else needs to step in and help with him, the wheels come off the bus.
Okay.
Easier. So even with my husband, who's a very hands-on dad, but like just yesterday, he tried to do a task with our son that he always does, and he was screaming and yelling, "No daddy, no daddy." So I'm trying to just figure out a way to help it be a more peaceful, meaningful experience with other people too, because I do work as well, so I need to be able to leave the house and not feel like, he's upset and screaming when I'm not there.
Right. It's a challenge. It's usually, we can kind of look at it in two ways. One is preventive measures, and then the other is sort of reactive and hopefully positive reactive. If you're dealing with a kid who needs to know what's going on, or he's very scheduled, so he likes to know, a level of preparedness is usually helpful to say, all right, mommy's going to go to work today, so this is your schedule. This is who's going to be helping you. Today's a dad helper day, and dad's gonna, put you on the bus, whatever it is, so that they know what to expect. And then when the child does a good job with that, it's all about praise. We can't wait to call mommy and tell her what a nice job you did today, or what a great helper you were, or how what nice listening you did. In some instances, you can't always prepare, but a big part, and you'll probably hear me talk about this going forward, is validating feelings. A lot of times we don't worry, or don't be upset, or get over it. We do this every day. And we really want to present to kids that their feelings are valid. I know you like it when mommy helps you take a bath, but mommy's working today, so daddy's going to help you. Just validating that their feelings are real, they're having a tough time, but that they're going to be okay. So that's a very important message. And it's going all the way through. And it's setting a very good precedent for the relationship, that they know that you're there for them and that you understand. You can't always fix it. Yeah. Just because you get upset doesn't mean mom's not going to go to work. But I know that it's not your favorite. But on Saturday I'm going to be here, and we'll do our routine together. Okay, you're welcome. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
This sort of segued into it with my first question about TV and screens.
Okay.
TV okay? I mean, I feel like there's other child people that are just eliminate television altogether. I sort of wonder, because I feel like also sometimes my child, she's just want to watch a show, and that's sort of for downtime. Whereas I feel like as an adult, sometimes I just want to sit and watch TV.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm just wondering what's an acceptable amount of television and screen time?
Everybody always asks. This is people want a magic number, and there really isn't one. But I have tendency to really go much less. And I say that because it's harder to pull back. When kids have unlimited access to computers and iPads and games and TV shows, then it becomes a struggle to have to take the device. And because a lot of times these devices come with us, and it's, I have a daughter, I do it too. She's young. If I'm at a restaurant, all right, just take the phone, it's fine. But it's harder to pull back. So if you can have things that you're comfortable with, so if it's you and the other parent, something that you both agree on, it's not a bad thing to let them have access to something. It's also becomes very much, as they get older, a little bit of a social issue, because you don't want to feel left out. If everybody's, as they get older, it's everyone has a cell phone, but even as, if everyone's watching a show, everyone watches these movies or characters, that's a part of our society now. You kind of need to be involved in that, but knowing when it works best. If it's the morning, sometimes I think it's a good rule, not in the morning, because that's when the routine can get a little bit off kilter. Nobody wants to turn the TV off to do the routine and what they have to do. That's when it becomes more of a problem, when it's becoming preference to everything else. Kids who don't want to turn it off and go to dance class that they used to really love to do, or they'd rather sit and watch TV or play a game than call their friend up the street that they generally like to play with. So if you can say, you know what, you get one show a day, or, you get, as we get older and kids get a little bit more autonomous, we can say you get 1 hour of screens today. How you choose to use it is up to you. So that could be games, it could be computers, it could be, Snapchat. I don't even know what everybody's doing nowadays, but figuring out how to help them establish their own limits around it, because left to their own devices, they're just gonna watch and watch, but a little bit is okay. And that's how I feel anyway. Yes.
My son is 2, and recently, when he's in an enjoyable activity, like at the playground or doing something really fun, it's hard to. He gets like a little tantrum, and we have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I do the whole countdown. Okay, it's gonna be 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Two more times on the slide.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it's like. So what do I do?
I mean, that's setting the foundation very well. Again, another preventive measure is if we leave the park nicely, we can go home and do blank. So something to look forward to. It doesn't always necessarily need to be a treat. It could be we can read an extra book together, or you can help me get the stuff ready for dinner. Something that he would hopefully be a motivator. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to find a motivator. And it might not work in that moment because he really doesn't care about going home to read a story if he's having fun at the park. But it's good to, and then remember what we said we're going to do, and let's go home. And if he does have a tantrum, which inevitably they will or they do, just stepping back, not engaging, not making it into a bigger thing. I'm just going to wait. And he's a little young, but usually what we would try to do is tie it into some sort of consequence, which is tomorrow we're going to need to leave the park even earlier, or tomorrow we're not going to get to come to the park. Like I said, he's a little young to make that connection from one event to the next. But starting to help kids see that the consequences is connected to their behaviors, whether positive or negative. So even if it's, I know you don't want to leave, but I brought your favorite book and you can read it to me on the car ride home, or, we'll walk and hold, whatever it is, something that could motivate him to leave a little bit better. Yes. I see you.
My daughter definitely has some problems with transitions.
Okay.
I would call it a heritable trait. Obviously, as an adult, you have all sorts of coping mechanisms that she doesn't necessarily have. But instead of tackling transitions, which frankly spread themselves out, they're threaded through every day, every activity. So is it best to just pick one and start with it, or what's the best way? And she's 5 already.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently has an easier time for outside adults than for parents.
That happens a lot. We're going to talk about that. That's for a whole other day.
We like that.
Teachers say, "Oh, she's terrible." But I do see that transitions are a hard thing for her, and her ability to think logically actually makes it harder sometimes to argue again. It becomes an actual argument. I'm sometimes impressed with the level of argument, but nonetheless, it needs to get done. Do I pick one and start there? Or?
It's generally a good idea to start small. You don't want to, rock her entire world, because what you just said is really important, that this is for her all day long. Imagine struggling with something all day long, that just when you're starting to get settled, it's time to move on and do something else. It's, so thinking of it that way, to say, all right, it's just probably as frustrating or uncomfortable for her as it is to be the one having to reinforce the transitions. So it is a good idea to pick one and start with something, and work to have her, again, do a little bit of preparation before and rewarding after. And when she's starting to have some success with it, praise. And then slowly try to tackle something else. So pick, I would say, the most important thing. It might be like a morning routine or a bedtime routine, and then, start small and then it'll, because what you said was she's actually older, but when we think about it, 5 is still
That's it.
kind of like a baby in some
The
instances.
vocabulary is there, but the emotional
Right,
isn't
that
there, so it's almost
creates a
like
whole different level.
Yeah.
I found just like when I'm setting an alarm, like you always have your phone on you. I'll set my son, and I have a 2-year-old in that. 10 more minutes, and they hear the alarm. It's like a lobby. Okay. Literally, we'll watch the show. They'll hear the alarm, they'll stand up and just go outside. You know,
Wow.
and this is just a lot.
The timer.
You know, especially with like a show or something. The show with like 20 minutes, like only like 10 minutes. So it just got something that worked for me. I'm always having fun. Some sort of trigger.
Even a timer.
The time,
I've been doing
I
that too, like,
yeah.
he goes, 4 more minutes. 4 more minutes.
Then it's like the
Okay.
on instead of you talking.
Yes.
eat off of yourself.
Very
Yeah,
good.
listen to the
I just, she was going to ask you next, and then I'll come to you.
It's interesting what you just said about imagining you are struggling with something all day long and how that must feel.
Yeah.
You know, we tend to focus on like how it feels to be the reinforcer, and it ties into what I'm wondering because often so my oldest son is one who tends to be more inflexible, and has always had a tougher time with transitions, and will probably always be like that to an extent. But I often wonder whether I handled it the right way because we've gotten to a point where now, with a little bit more maturity, I am the reinforcer. This is what it is. I'm sorry if you're upset, but this is what it is. Put yourself together and let's move on. And I often wonder if that's too hard of an approach, and am I breaking him a little bit every time my expectation kind of is very frank? Are there other ways that can kind of maybe help acknowledge what he's feeling or the struggle that he's having while still saying, and this is what we're doing?
That's a reality of the situation. Just because we don't like something or we're unhappy doesn't mean things are going to change. So I think you nailed it, which is I'm sorry you're upset, but we still have to. In some instances, how old is her? 7. You can say, I'm sorry that you're upset. Tell me what you think you need to feel better. In some instances, you can show some flexibility when it's appropriate, but it's not always. So you could say, I'm sorry you're upset. Why don't you take 5 minutes to get yourself together? I'll come back and see if I can help you. Let me know if you need a hug. Let me know if you want to chill out with a book for a few minutes. So you might need to maybe build in some time for that, instead of when it's, everybody's rushing out the door. And again, this is all very ideal. I understand that some days, but if you can maybe build in a little time to say, I know you don't like this, but this is what it is today. Tomorrow, we've got a little bit more time and we can go to the store that you're asking to go, but today it doesn't work. So it sounds like you're really doing
It's
on
funny
the right
because
track.
you look at activities and things like that and certain days. I know today's a Tuesday, and I know that we have soccer, and I know that my son doesn't like to come home and do his homework, but that's what we have to do on days like today.
Mhm.
And I often wonder, is it worth it? Should I be doing this? Should I just say no?
Mm.
It's and it's the reason why we try to limit it to one thing. So it's only like this a few days, but
Yes.
you wonder whether it's worth it.
That's actually one of the things I think I'm going to talk about, scheduling of children and over-scheduling and the impact that can have.
Why?
I understand.
Scheduling for the extra time to transition. Because if you schedule it on the front end, because obviously it is a heritable trait. I'm intense like her, and so I have to then, the list of what to bring in the morning isn't actually for her. Maybe it's for me,
Yep.
And so if I'm managing my own life, if you pre-schedule the extra transition time, that's a calmer vein.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of filters itself.
That's perfect. Yeah. Because it's harder to deal with these things when you're feeling more impatient or rushed, and that's life. We're usually running somewhere, but it's worth the extra 15 minutes if you can just drop everyone off and feel like everyone's sort of leaving. Like, okay, we're in a good place this morning. Yes.
A more basic question, but at what age and how do you start working on thumb sucking? By prom would be ideal. That's my goal. But I know he's really young, but I just wonder. I'm sure other parents maybe with pacifiers and stuff, but I think my son does it when he focuses. He does it before bed.
Okay.
And he does it when he needs soothing. So a lot of different times he uses it, I think, as a crutch and has like blisters like on his thumbs from sucking them. And we don't, I don't make a big deal about it. Occasionally I'll just like gently pull it out of his mouth and distract him with something else if like I want to take a picture. Maybe not have his hand like jammed in his face. But I'm just wondering, is there an age that you think is a good time to start to maybe talk about not sucking our thumb, or how do you?
I mean, it usually has tendency to come up when it's viewed as less socially acceptable, which is when they're out of the house a little bit more. So, again, there's no exact number, but if you're noticing that it's very purposeful for him, what I usually, again, because it's a physical release of something. So, trying to replace it with something else. So if you're noticing whenever he's sucking his thumb, maybe they have those like little balls that you could squish, that they've got the spikes on them. So when you notice that he's, or even before he gets into bed, why don't you hold the ball, or let's, mommy will hold your hand while we read a story. Something to help him get used to not sucking, and you can sort of carry things with you. Even maybe like a Tic Tac, something in his mouth, like when you're out and you don't want him doing it. Just to start to plant that seed, you know what, why don't you just take this instead of sucking your thumb? So you don't need to make it a negative thing, but just slowly try to replace it with something that's a little bit more positive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have one question.
Sure.
At what Ari was saying about overscheduling sometimes, and as a parent, we need to listen to what the child is saying. And if he's saying, "I don't like soccer. I don't want to go to soccer," we know that it would be okay not to send him to soccer, but sometimes as parents, we feel guilty that everybody else is doing soccer. You have to do soccer, and you feel that pressure as a parent to do it. I don't know. Sometimes
the pressure is real.
Yeah.
It's starting much younger than it ever did before. And when also you have multiple children and you're dragging one to, I talk to parents who feel like they're a chauffeur service between the hours of like 2 and 6. It's just running all over and carpooling. It's but yeah, cramming in dinner, eating in the car, doing homework, while you're sitting in the parking lot. And again, there's some level of that you try to make it work when the children are very much interested in an activity and they want to be part of a team. But it's important to, it sounds ridiculous. I did a training once on scheduling downtime, like scheduling time to do nothing. And it's harder than it thinks because, there's birthday parties and there's family obligations. And when parents are working, you're trying to cram everything into the hours and also see your children. And unfortunately, those hours are not for like sitting and hanging out and playing and enjoying it. It's, again, all right, get your uniform, get your cleat. And it's more about getting all these obligations. So it's important that if your kids sign up for something, teaching, honoring commitments and things like that. So it's good to take short periods of time to give it a trial. Say, all right, well, we signed up for soccer and it's 8 Saturdays and we're going to see how it goes. And then always reevaluate. Don't assume that just because you did it, you're going to keep doing it. And it's asking them to pick one. So they need to do something. Because again, kids, especially as they get older, have tendency just to chill out and want to be on their screens. But to say, all right, we tried dance, you didn't love it. These are your options. You can try an art class and short. Keep them. I know sometimes things have tendency to be like 3 days a week. That might be a lot for one activity for a young child. And just sort of teaching kids, we call like the art of doing nothing. Play dates, those are just invaluable in a lot of ways. And it doesn't need to be a 3-hour play date where it goes until everyone's crying and things fall apart, because that's usually when it's like, all right, it's time to go. But if you can say, all right, we've got an hour, and they can play nicely and get along and leave and consider it a successful play date, you're more likely to want to do those things again. And it doesn't need to take all evening. They might not want to leave, which transition, but it's a good thing to try to establish that time for them where they just get to do nothing and they learn how to occupy their own time. Kids are forgetting how to do that, so they need your help. Yes.
My daughter is 4.
Mm-hmm.
She cannot stop using her cell
Mm-hmm.
almost 10 hours, 12 hours every day. When she sleeps, she uses Pacific. When she sits in the car, when she gets tired, when she gets home, the first thing she do is to get her Pacific. So,
Okay.
and I think she broke the teeth because of this. And also, she only drink milk by bottles.
Okay.
So her teeth is bad, very bad now.
Okay.
So I'm trying to stop her to use the Pacific, and it seems kind of impossible because she would cry, wouldn't sleep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there are two approaches, and one would be sort of gradual, and the other, which works for some kids, and other kids it's more immediate. Like they have these books where there's like a pacifier fairy, and you wrap them all up, and they go to other babies that need them, and you sort of get them out of the house to eliminate all temptation. It makes for a very rough transition because you're right, they don't know what to do. That's a big soother for them. So similarly to with the thumb sucking, figure out something else. Sometimes it's a soft stuffed animal or a blanket that they can, rub or replace. So I would start to introduce that so that she was not left totally out of sorts. Thinking about a time where you would do it is important. On a Sunday, and she's got to go to school on Monday, is not a great idea because she's going to be exhausted. So maybe on a Friday night, or if there's a long extended weekend, or even a week off, trying to be thoughtful about it and understanding that it's going to be really, really hard. But if you in the meantime want to start pulling back a little bit, which is no pacifiers out of the house, so that in the car, she might scream in the car, it's likely it's going to be hard. This is something that she's gotten very used to. It's a habit. It's hard to unbreak a habit. But like I said, there are a lot of books that are, I forget the names of them at the moment, but that would be, that are good help. And you read them with the child, and it sort of gets them excited about like getting rid of it in theory. And I've had some kids like throw them away and then are like, no, they want them back, but it's too late. So, and they make it through. It's just,
You don't harm them.
no.
Oh,
You're not harming them.
it should stop it.
Yes.
My daughter has two bad habits. When she has meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, she had iPad in front of her. When she was very little, and 1 year, 2 years until now, like this morning, first thing she put the iPad here. We tried to stop her, but we couldn't. She wouldn't eat without iPad.
So it's going to, talk about how to undo some of that, because again, now it's something that she associates with eating. So in a behavioral way, she wants her show while she's eating. She'll eat at some point, but again, it's going to be a rough transition. So I wouldn't do all this stuff at once, but pick one thing at a time to start working on. And it would be good to really start taking that iPad away.
We tried to put the training to other kids to stop her watching iPad.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work.
It's hard, and
Stop them.
well, kids learn the connection to their behaviors. They know if they're out and they scream because they want something and you don't want them to scream, they're going to get what they want. Some level of that we all kind of do it sometimes just to get through a tough moment or a situation. But a good place to start is at home with that, to say like, all right, you could scream all you want. The iPad is gone, or it's not charged. I mean, that would resist all temptation if it's not even in the house or there's no charge to it, and say, you can scream. Yeah, you can scream all you want. These are things that we can do instead. We're going to read a book. We're going to play a game. We can go outside, but we are not using the iPad today.
Being really respectful of your time, I just wanted to add a topic for future.
Yes.
I would just love to talk a little bit about meaningful ways to speak to young children about death.
Okay.
It's something that's come up in our home, and we're very, he's a baby, obviously, so we're really sheltered in the way that we explain death, explain loss.
Okay.
But I think it's an important topic, and I'm sure all families are touched, whether it's the family dog or it's a relative or whatever. And I just would love to learn a little bit more, like what are appropriate phrases to use? How do you explain not coming back? And I would love to talk more about that.
Sure.
Down the road when you have time.
Yes, absolutely. I'll add it to
Yeah.
one of our conversations. Anything else that And I'll ask this every time,
Yeah.
but
Any other
anything else
topic?
that you guys would want to make sure that I cover?
I think it was very poignant what you said about validating their feelings. I have an 8, 6, and 2-year-old, and I think, especially for my 8-year-old, validating how a child feels. Sometimes we lose sight of as a parent, like you said, with the craziness of scheduling and going about our daily routines, or whether it's trying to get through soccer practice, but sometimes stepping back and thinking about them each individually as different children. Because I'm sure all of us here have multiple children who are, we'd love to say are all just wonderful, straight from heaven with halos up in heaven. They're all so different, and I'm working much harder at trying to like think, okay, this is what went through all day that maybe made me feel this way. To try to validate that. So I really appreciate you saying that, because it's a reminder to myself sometimes to not just like, get your shoes on, let's go. Come on, okay, let's go. Next,
Right.
we gotta go here, we have to go here. Because it is a balancing act.
Right.
And they each need something different.
Yes.
And sometimes we feel like we're spread thin. So
You are, I'm sure. That's the reality, is this, everyone's like running in 100 different directions.
just validating them, and I think being aware of how they are reacting. And maybe not forcing everything on them so much. So overscheduling, I think talking about scheduling
Yes.
would be greatly appreciated.
Yep, absolutely. All right, thank
very
you.
much, Vanessa.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Oh, yes, I have some brochures just from the agency if anyone's interested in learning more about the services that we provide. That's our agency.